This is my video on how to make a control deck in Commander. So we've talked about how to build an aggro deck in Commander. It's pretty simple. You really want to have a lot of tempo. You're constantly putting creatures down onto the battlefield and swinging out, or having some ways of having stats on board, whether that's token creation or of course just playing creatures from your hand and dealing damage. But how do you get the opposite? How can you build a control deck in something like Commander? Typically, these are much harder to have simply because a lot of this removal is 1-for-1. And if it's 1-for-1, it's actually negative advantage. What is advantage, you may ask? We'll get to that a little bit later in this video. But before we do that, I've got to tell you about something really cool. Today's video is brought to you by Into the AM. Into the AM is committed to making premium, high-quality apparel and supporting creators like me to help you guys get some awesome deals. Into the AM actually sent me 3 of their basic tees. And I gotta say, guys, usually I don't really care for a lot of tees. Most of the time, they're just pretty normal and comfortable. But when I tell you that these tees were very snug, were very comfortable, and can basically pair with everything, it was an absolute blast and joy to be able to see that this was my sponsor. This is the first time I've ever had a sponsor on the channel, and to see that it's a sponsor that I can truly believe in and be able to showcase to you guys is actually awesome. And of course, not only are they sponsoring this video, they also have hooked you guys up with a 10% off deal if you use my code MTGDriver. That's intotheam.com/MTGDriver, and you can get 10% off your order. So click the link in my description to get that 10% discount code, and thank you Into the AM for supporting the channel. Now let's get back to it. So there are really 3 to maybe 4 key areas in a control deck in EDH that I really like to build around. And those categories are mana, advantage, interaction, and some win cons. There's technically a 5th, so you could say 4.5 categories, which are commander specific cards. But in most control decks, you're wanting to have a lot of these first 3 categories and a little bit of these last 2 categories. So 4.5 is kind of a good number. Let's go over that first category right about now. Control decks are an economic strategy. You're trying to get to the late game as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. So when it comes to mana, in a lot of cases, around 47 mana sources in most decks is a good range. For me though, in my control decks, I like to have anywhere around 50 to 53 mana sources, split between lands and rocks. Now, depending on how fast you want to go and how crazy your curve is going to determine the split between lands and mana rocks or ramp. Because we're in a control strategy, I like to usually say around 37 lands. You want to make sure that you're always hitting your land drops in case there is a giant reset with something like a board wipe or a vandal blast. Lands in EDH are not typically interacted with, so if you can always have your land drops, you can ensure that by turn 7, 8, and 9, you're going to have that amount of respective lands. Unless, of course, you're in green as well. So I like to have this split because some of the best things that you can do in Commander is ramping. So if you have 53 mana sources, you're really investing in the mana that you want your deck to produce at all times. And the more rocks or ramp spells that you have in this process, the faster you're going to get to that late game point that you're looking to get to anyways. It doesn't matter what bracket you're at or anything. I think that 53 mana sources in any control deck is going to be a great number. 50 is also a good number, but I like 53 because I'm quite greedy. The next category we want to go over is advantage. Specifically, card advantage. Now, in super simple terms, card advantage is simply being able to see more cards of your deck. That is the very base term. This means that drawing cards, or looting, or being able to play cards from the top of your library, or being able to utilize your graveyard. Any of these things that allow you to see more cards in your deck. Now, in a more nuanced way, there's of course card draw and card selection. So these looting effects are not necessarily advantage. You are not gaining a card when you do this, so you're not going up on your opponents. But you are able to see further into your deck. This is why cantrips are pretty dang good, is because they usually let you select more cards in your deck by seeing more cards in your deck. So while they aren't technically card advantage because you're not going up in any resources, you are getting more knowledge of your deck and your board state, which means you can make better decisions for yourself. Now, let's go on to the actual advantage side of things, which is usually just card draw. Having a ton of ways to draw cards, both conditional and unconditional, is going to be a great addition to your deck. Like I said, the best things you can do in Commander are ramp and draw cards. Once again, I'm pretty greedy, so I like to have a lot, and I mean a lot, of card draw in my decks. If you really think about it, the more mana and the more card draw you have, the less of those actual other beefy cards that you actually need. And the reason why I say that is because if you're seeing more of your deck per game, you will be able to see those cards even if you only have 12 cards that fit a certain theme, because you are seeing so much. Now on the flip side though, if you only have card draw and ramp, then sometimes you can't just durdle and play the game and expect people not to attack you, especially when you are the economic late game strategies. Because of that, you still want to have a decent amount of cards that you can put on the board to protect you, or plenty of removal. So at the end of the day, have plenty of splits between unconditional and conditional card draw. Now, unconditional card draw obviously is just spells that say draw X amount of cards. Draw 3, draw 2, draw 8 if it's an X spell, I don't know. Any of these cards that are going to get you more cards in hand or get you further into your deck are going to be great inclusions, especially if they can do it on their own. Now next, you also want some conditional draw. You're going to have a commander, and that commander is going to want to do a specific thing, or you'll be following a specific strategy like a creature strategy, or a token strategy, or a spell slinger strategy. Because of that, you want some cards that can complement that strategy specifically. So for creatures, something like a Beast Whisperer; for tokens, something like a Welcoming Vampire; and for Spellslinger, something like an Archmage Emeritus. These are conditional draw, but they support the overall strategy you're trying to achieve. So that's our advantage package. We now have actually most of our deck complete, and it's time to figure out our removal, our commander specific cards, and our win conditions. But before we do that, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'm getting back to posting weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, and a lot of shorts content is coming your way. So if you'd like to support me, Deck Driver, a subscription goes a long way. And if you know a friend that loves building commander decks, you can share the video with them as well. So let's get into it. So we've talked about how we want a lot of mana sources. We're a very economic strategy when playing control. Around 50 to 53 mana sources split between lands and ramp. Then we also talked about getting card advantage. The best way to control the game is by having more cards than your opponents. And now let's talk about interaction. As a control player, obviously you want to interact with the board a lot. And there's many different ways that we can go about doing that, so let's get into it. The first type we're going to talk about, which is probably the most common in something like Commander, is spot removal. Something like a Swords to Plowshare, or a Path to Exile, or a Pongify, or any of these cards that allow you to get rid of things on the board. Basically anything that you play it and you get to remove one thing. This is called spot removal. Usually it's at instant speed and you're getting rid of one thing on the map, so it's a 1-for-1. Now, when we go back to the advantage section and we talk about how we want to really get more card advantage than our opponent, you really don't actually want a lot of spot removal. And that's a big mistake that a lot of people run into when making commander decks, is that they say, oh, I want to control the board, so I'm going to add a bunch of spot removal in my Azorius deck. The thing is that you don't actually want a lot of this, because most of the time it is negative card advantage. You're going down 1 and your opponent you're interacting with is also going down 1. But this means that your other 2 opponents that are at the table aren't losing anything for the interaction. So because of that, you really want to diversify the types of removal you are running and the types of interaction that you're running. So usually in my decks, I usually limit the spot removal to be around 4 to maybe 5 cards. Now, if you're in blue and you want to consider counterspells spot removal, usually I'm okay with adding up to maybe 7 or 8 of these cards, because counterspells can also counter board wipes, and they can also counter some of those game-ending spells, so they're a bit more flexible when it comes to interacting with the board. The only thing that's tough about counterspells, and the reason we still want to limit it, is not only is it still negative card advantage, but also you can only interact on the stack. Yes, that is extremely powerful in Magic, but if something's already on the board, you still want to have spot removal in order to get rid of it if it is there. So counterspells are good in a lot of cases, but they're only good to a certain extent. Then when we're talking about positive advantage, you want to have something that can get at least 3-for-1. If it's 2-for-1, you might be able to add it, but 3 for 1 is really the number we're looking for. Cards like Sheoldred's Edict or a Burglar Rat are things in something like a mono black deck that could still be considered advantaged removal, because each of these you're going down 1, but each of your opponents are also going down 1. So therefore, the table is net even, which I would consider advantage. Another great way to have plenty of advantage is board wipes. Now yes, board wipes do slow down the game, but when we are a control deck and we're trying to get to that late game as fast as possible, the best way to do that is to provide a big speed bump in the game in order to slow the rest of the table down, so you can then technically accelerate your game plan. Think about it as a car. If you're going 45 miles an hour, but your opponents are going 60, yes, you're going slower than they are. But if they all pop their tires, your 45 is now extremely fast. So consider that like a board wipe. You're popping their tires and you're deflating their gas so that they are completely slowed down and you are still able to go at your speed. So board wipes are great, but also don't run too much of them because sometimes they can be dead cards if nothing's going on. But in terms of advantage, they are the highest payoffs in terms of removal. All right, so now we have our shell, which is around 75 to 80 cards. This is all of our mana, all of our advantage, and all of our interaction. Now, you might think 80 cards, wow, what about our main strategy? What about adding stuff for the commander? That is the next topic. The rest of your cards, whether it be 25 cards left or whether it be 10 cards left, should be able to be split between your win cons and the cards that you are trying to synergize with your commander. In control decks, synergy is not nearly as important as advantage and mana. Having a good shell of advantage, interaction, and mana is always going to be better than having extreme synergy pieces in the deck. But the rest of the slots that are available after you have that shell should be towards your commander and what your commander wants to do. I mean, you picked the commander for a reason, so you want to add cards that work directly with that commander. This is where you have those synergy pieces. Let's say your commander wants to cast a lot of spells. This is where you can add a ton of cantrips, maybe some burn spells, or any kind of creature that wants to do the exact same thing and has a similar effect. Or maybe your commander wants to sacrifice things. This is where you add a lot of pieces that can be sacrificed for free, or sacrificed for a lot of value, or they enter the battlefield, get their stuff done, and then can be sacrificed later. Anything like that is exactly what your commander's wanting to do, and if you have around 12 to 15 cards of this type, you will see plenty of success and you will still be able to synergize correctly with your commander. And now for the last couple slots in your deck, we are looking for our win cons. In a control deck, you don't need a lot of ways to win. This should be a big spell that's able to kill the table with one cast and should not be a typical bomb that you put on the battlefield with crazy stats. Yes, Blightsteel can technically be your win con, but if you only have 1 or 2 big creature threats, it's not hard for your opponents to just hold their spot removal for your win cons. That's why you want a lot of things that are going to basically win the game on the spot. Something like a Rise of the Dark Realms is great for this, or Exsanguinate is great for this. For blue cards, having something like a Psychic Corrosion before you draw 20 cards is great. For something like red, a Crackle with Power is going to be awesome. Any of these kind of one card win con-ish spells should be able to get you there the rest of the way. And this also can be able to synergize with your commander. Let's take my Plagon deck for an example. In Plagon, the entire goal is to draw a ton of cards based off of our big booty creatures. We have low power, but we have very high toughness. So the couple of win cons are based around us drawing a bunch of cards or us having really high toughness. And we have cards that deal damage based on the amount of cards that we draw each turn. And that is it. Besides that, we are drawing a bunch of cards, we're interacting with the board when we need to, and we're just having a good time flickering our starfish as much as we need to. This is what control decks want to do. They want to be able to open up their window as fast as possible with plenty of ramp, plenty of draw, and just a few win cons that can help win them the game whenever they really need to and whenever the board state allows for it. So now let's talk about actually controlling the game. Similar to how we talked about with the spot removal and people using it too much in control decks, another thing is when to actually use this spot removal. A lot of times the reason control decks can be so complicated is because you have to have really good threat assessment in order to truly pilot them. Does this mean that control decks are harder than aggro decks? Not necessarily. Does it mean it requires a bit more decision making? Absolutely. Your spot removal should be used for your opponent's 1 card win conditions, or some of their biggest advantage engines. If your opponent has a 7 mana commander and they are completely reliant on that commander being out, it's probably best not to get rid of their 3/3 and rather wait until they use that commander because of how much that will set them behind. However, let's say that 3/3 is drawing them an extra 2 to 3 cards per turn cycle. Then it might actually be a good idea to remove that because of the amount of advantage that they're getting. In control decks, it's probably best to interact as early as possible when your opponents are trying to set up, sandbag a little bit in the late game, and then when your window starts to open up, interact as much as you possibly can. As salty as it might be a good idea to counter their Soul Ring. It might be a good idea to destroy that Soul Ring or Arcane Signet because you are setting them behind. The goal for control decks is not to interact with everything, but to pop tires. You are an economic strategy, so if you can get to your win conditions faster than your opponents, you're going to be in a good spot. Therefore, if you can get rid of their economy, which is drawing cards or making mana, then you definitely should do it. As weird as it might seem, I don't really care about an 8/8 vanilla creature. I care about the 2/2 that is drawing you 10 cards. So that's what I would get rid of rather than the 8/8, because the 8/8 could also go at your other opponents and not just you. So that's kind of my philosophy on how to play control decks. You really want to try to pop their tires as early as possible, kind of sandbag in the middle game while you're trying to grow your own economy, and then completely wipe the board and set up your win condition when the late game starts. And that's about it. That is how you build and play control decks in Commander from Deck Driver's perspective. If you guys have any thoughts on how you like to build control decks or how you prefer to play the control decks, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Control decks are fun and can be very budget friendly, so go check out that Plagon list that I mentioned earlier. And if you guys enjoy my stuff, remember to check out Into the AM, which can help support me directly while also getting you guys some awesome t-shirts and other merch. Thank you again to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all next time.